Today we're going to do a project. We're going to take this mink coat that I don't know if it's ever been worn. The lining is in pristine condition. And we're going to take it apart and we're going to make it into a blanket. So the first thing we do is unfasten all of the lining. We're just going to open this up, take the lining out, take the kicker. This is the inside for the French hem, the kicker out. And we're going to open it up flat. So this usually takes me about an hour and a half to rip it out. And then after we've got the lining ripped out, we're going to see how it looks. So at this point, I've got the lining out. I've got all of the padding that was in the front edges. I've got the pockets removed. The hem has been let down. And what I need to do now is remove all of these loose threads. And then I'm going to separate the sleeves from the body and open up the shoulder seams. Take the collar off at the neckline. And this collar is in, let's see, is it 2 pieces or is it 1? This collar has a lapel collar system. That's 1 piece. So we got to figure out, we'll open up this lapel line right here and then figure out how to do it after I've got the under collar off. So when you open up a seam, what you're looking for is the loop. There is a loop side and then there's like a regular flat stitch side. You want the loop side. You're going to break one of these loops, pull the loose thread, and it'll come right out because it's a overseam type chain stitch. Some seams are going to be a little bit harder to recognize that on. This is one of those seams. This is the loop side. And if they've been stitched more than once, then it gets a little tricky. But it's best to rip them open instead of cutting them. I don't like to cut them because that's just not good. So yeah, so like on this side, this is a better example. There is the loop right here. You break that loop and you pull your thread and you can rip probably the whole sleeve out with 1 thread pull. So here is, I broke the thread and you can see now, you just pull it and the whole seam is ripping out quite easily. So you just want to get that loop and then start pulling. The thread will break every once in a while, but it works good. Sometimes it's just not that sensible to sit there and pick at threads. So in that case, what I do is I take my fur knife and I cut right next to the seam line. And you can see how I've done that. And that's fine too. So however you want to take it apart, you just need to separate like the main seams, the sleeve from the body, the shoulder seams, and you don't want to do the side seam because you want to keep that intact. So don't do the side seam, but the sleeves, the shoulder, and the collar you want to take off. Well, I've got my whole coat all opened up. I took all the loose threads off. I might have 1 or 2, but I've got it pretty well done. Then what I did was I closed the pocket openings up. I marked it so you can kind of see like where they were. This pocket opening was here. And so I closed that up. I closed up the spots where the hook and eyes were. And then I went over and just made sure there were no other holes in it. Now, if the coat had been worn for a long time, you might have some wear areas on where the old fasteners were on the fur side, but this coat was so new that all I had to do was close it up. So, and the same with the pockets. If this had been a coat that had been used for a long time, sometimes the pocket edges would show wear. So then you'd have to trim out that worn pocket edge before you close it up. And once you restretch it, it wouldn't be noticeable as long as you did remove that wear edge or the worn edge. Now what we're going to do is I removed the cold tape from around this armhole and the neckline, and so I've got all that off because the cold tape won't stretch. I'm also going to trim this seam edge ever so slightly just to get rid of that seam edge that I had cut with my knife instead of like pulling the threads. And what we're going to do is we're going to fill in the armhole. So here's the bottom of the armhole, and there is the top. And what I'm going to do is fill this area in with the fur from the sleeve. So here's my sleeve, and I'm going to, a lot of times I'll make pillows out of the sleeve or use them for a border if the blanket's real short. But this is going to be pretty easy project to do because this coat was extremely balanced in width. It was a very straight coat. From the front edge to the front edge at the bottom, right down there at the bottom going across, was 56 inches wide. So it's not a big coat. Sometimes you'll have coats that might have up to 70 inches in sweep. But this was a very, very narrow, straight coat. And up at the top, from the lapel edge going across to the other edge, was 54. So there's only a difference of like 2 inches in width from the top of this coat to the bottom of this coat. So once I get this armhole area filled in on both sides with the fur from the sleeves, I think that I'll be able to just stretch this and nail this out so it'll get pretty balanced. Now, if you had a coat that had a lot of sweep, all right, that was narrow on the top and had the sweep on the bottom, then what I do is I like to take the back and try and use that as the main section. And I'll take at the side seam, I'll remove the fronts and I'll flip the fronts going to where the hem would be at this end and the neck would be at this end. First, I fill in the armholes, and I don't usually trim it off until I've got it completely on the board and have it stretched. But what that does is it kind of gives the blanket an interesting aspect because you've got the hair going this direction on one end of the blanket, the hair going that way in the middle of the blanket, and the hair going that way on the other end of the blanket. So it looks nice. You just have to kind of like play with what you're going to do. Now, if I would cut this off, you're going to be losing all that fur at the bottom, and you don't want to lose that fur. So it works out really quite well. Now, what we're going to do with this is fill these armholes in, and then once we get the armholes filled in, I'll show you what that will look like. But for lack of a better way to do it, just take your sleeve, lay it underneath, or put a piece of paper underneath and take a pattern off of it. Lay your sleeve underneath and match, the best way to put that in. I like the aspect that you could do two ways. You could basically square this off at the bottom So you just come straight across at the armhole, and then you see where this starts swinging up for the top of the sleeve. So you could square this off, or you could use, this has got kind of like a V armhole. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use this because it's got more of a gradual look to it, and I think the fur will look better done at a gradual kind of like going down than it would be cutting it straight off. I think it'd be a little bit more visible in the fur if I did it like that. So, you know, sometimes you just do what you have to do. And this is where I believe my point is going to be, where I'm going to be trimming this off. And you see, this is where the collar attached to, this had a very small lapel with that little notch collar it had. So, but I believe I'm going to be coming from this point, going, you know, straight across to the other front. You know, you could build up this neckline. It's really not worth it. To me, I think that the best thing to do is just try to keep it as clean as possible. And this coat still has, you know, decent stretch to it. When you look at these skins and you kind of pull on them, it bounces back. So I don't think I'll have any issue in nailing this. Some of the older coats you have to be very gentle with, and use a combination of water with denatured alcohol, a 50-50 mix. When nailing this coat, I'm just going to use water. So I'm going to fill these in, and then I'll show you what it looks like after I get those filled in. And so then we'll see what that looks like after I get that done. I'm making the pattern for that inset that I need to do on the armholes. So what I've done is I took my push pins and I started at the bottom of the armhole and I went across with push pins with my paper underneath. And then what I'm doing is, see this line in the pelt? I want that straight. So what I did was I just coaxed that straight. If I would have left it kind of like how it would have naturally been, it would have been over to here. So it's straighter now, and what that's going to do is give me more space between the front and the back, which I need. And it's also going to make that piece appear straighter that I'm doing in the piece that I'm doing the inset on. So I did that at both the back and the front. So you can see how this line is straighter now than if I would have let it relax, it would have come over to here. So I push pinned it down around the armhole. I made a couple of hash marks. So this is the double hash mark on the back. I've got another one here. And then on the front, I've got one there, and I've got one at the bottom. So I know what goes where. And then I took my tracing wheel and I went around the edge and got that nice so that when I pulled my fur off, I knew where my line would be. And then I drew my line. So this is what I'm going to use for the template for my fur that I'm going to use from my sleeve. Now, if I wanted to, I could take this line right here and kind of like draw a straight line so I have an idea of how that is going to follow up from the bottom, which is a pretty good idea. And then we're going to put this on our sleeve and mark it out, and then we'll cut it, and then we're going to sew it in that void that we've got. So this was my pattern of my piece. I cut it just a little generous, maybe about a 1/4 inch on each side, because I figured that would just be smart. And, you know, it fit in pretty well. So I've smoothed my seam down, and brushed it out, and I think it looks, you know, about as good as it's gonna look. So there it is in the coat, and I think once it's all blocked out, it'll even look better. So the next step we're going to do is take this and I'm going to put it on my nailing board, and we're going to square it out and then block it, wet stretch it and block it, and see how big we can make it. The other side I think looks pretty good too.